My own mother didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the linen-draped private dining room in downtown Boston to hear, "We wish you were never born." Conversations snapped shut like the expensive champagne glasses had been dropped. The soft jazz music choked into silence. Every pair of eyes swung toward me, Elara Vance, waiting to see if I would finally break down, just like they always expected the quiet one to do. But something else rose in my chest instead, something that had been silently building for 28 years. I lifted my head, meeting my mother's gaze, ready to answer her in a way no one in my family ever anticipated. Because the moment she tried to erase me was the moment I finally embraced the truth she never wanted me to know. I had grown up in the kind of affluent Dallas family that prioritized reputation above all else. A family that had just spent the last 5 years taking my money while actively campaigning for my downfall. My graduation dinner from MIT's Sloan School of Management was supposed to be my moment of hard-earned peace, a final necessary nod before I moved on with my life as a senior tech analyst. Instead, it became the stage for my ultimate rejection. My father shifted uncomfortably, and my mother looked only slightly regretful that she had let her true feelings slip in front of my esteemed professors and new firm's leadership. I stood tall, pushing my chair back with a deliberate scraping sound that cut through the silence like a dull knife. My throat felt tight, but my voice was steady, clearer than it had ever been. Consider me as if I never existed. I told them, my eyes unflinching as they moved between my parents. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Elara. The whole room froze. The applause and congratulations from earlier that evening felt like they belonged to a different world. My manager, Seth Miller, half rose, a look of shocked pity on his face. But I didn't wait. I simply turned and walked out, my heels hitting the polished wood floor in sharp, uneven beats. Before we dive deeper into my story, let me know what time it is and what city you are watching from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. If you've ever been the black sheep of your family, drop a comment below and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of my journey. The Vance family lived in an unspoken toxic order that had governed my life for years, where I was merely a satellite, orbiting the sun that was my older brother, Hayden Vance. He was the golden one, the boy destined for Capitol Hill, the one whose failures were always recast as stepping stones toward destiny. If Hayden sneezed, my mother Lydia fetched tissues like they were treating a national treasure. If Hayden brought home an honorable mention from a minor university debate, my father Jeffrey announced it across dinner like breaking news. And whenever I achieved something, even something real and consequential, the reaction was always the same, polite, brief, a soft pat on the back before the spotlight swung right back to where it belonged, on the future senator. I learned early on that my accomplishments, even those that kept their actual lives functioning, didn't qualify as real impact. Real impact in my family's distorted view meant power, political influence, and carrying the Vance name into the halls of governance, a purpose only Hayden could fulfill. I remember when I secured my full scholarship to MIT at 17, the reaction was a dismissive nod. "That's nice, Elara," my mother murmured, then added, "Hayden's already shadowing a state senator this week. Isn't that wonderful? He's building real connections." Connections. Those two words were the measuring stick they used for everything. Meanwhile, I worked 3 different part-time jobs through college, tutoring, cleaning research labs, and doing overnight coding gigs just to cover my living expenses, and more importantly, to keep paying the constant stream of financial emergencies that flowed from Dallas back to Boston. Our bills certainly didn't pay themselves, and my parents never once asked how I managed the workload. They only ever asked when my automated transfer payments for the family property tax, my mother's country club membership fees, and Hayden's escalating credit card debt were due. Some nights when I stayed late cleaning the labs, I would wipe down sterile surfaces and imagine what it would feel like to be seen. Not celebrated or adored, just acknowledged as a contributing, valuable person. But I quickly learned to live with the silence and survive inside it. Years later, when I landed the job offer with the prestigious tech firm in Boston, right after my MBA, my advisor cried harder than either of my parents did. My father simply nodded, murmuring something about Hayden's crucial networking rotations he was undergoing, as if my high six-figure job offer was a mere footnote in my brother's ongoing yet perpetually failing political saga. Still, a small foolish part of me always believed things would change, that maybe a success at this professional level would finally tilt the scales. For a brief moment after graduation, I let myself hope that my parents might meet me halfway, showing up to my celebratory dinner out of genuine pride, not mere obligation. I had meticulously planned the entire evening, a private room at a renowned New York-style steakhouse in the heart of Boston's financial district, crisp linens and aged wine. I covered everything: the deposit, the custom menu, the premium open bar. It wasn't extravagance. It was me desperately trying to build a bridge I still hoped could exist between us. I had always promised myself that success would be my ultimate escape route, but the more I succeeded, the more aggressively they ignored it. My colleagues and manager Seth Miller arrived first at the restaurant, warm, chatty, the kind of people who genuinely rooted for my future. Seth shook my hand, whispering, "Tonight's yours, Elara. You earned this." For a brief moment, the constant heaviness lodged in my chest lifted. Then my parents walked in. My mother's heels clicked across the marble floor of the foyer like she owned the entire establishment. My father's expression carried that familiar, calculated distance, a blend of polite indifference and practiced judgment. They came empty-handed, without a card or even a soft congratulations. If they felt pride, they concealed it with the precision of experienced diplomats. I still greeted them with the controlled smile I had spent years perfecting. Introductions began: my manager, my professor's classmates, who knew how many deadlines I'd carried on my back. Compliments followed in easy waves of admiration. "Jeffrey, Lydia, you must be incredibly proud of Elara," one of my finance professors said. "A position like this isn't something one stumbles into." My mother's smile thinned instantly. "We are proud of both our children," she answered lightly, the sweetness in her voice feeling like poison on my skin. "But Hayden, he's working toward real power in DC. He's making a real difference in policy. That's meaningful work." Another colleague, trying to steer the conversation back to me, chimed in. "Elara carried our entire data migration project last quarter. I don't know how she manages to handle that intensity." My father actually chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "She's clever with numbers," sure, he conceded, adjusting his tie. "But what Hayden does, that's legacy work. That's what matters to the Vance name." The conversation died instantly. Forks hovered mid-air. Even my colleagues, who barely knew the underlying dynamics, felt the temperature drop. I forced myself to breathe through the searing embarrassment, maintaining my strained smile until my cheeks ached. But inside, something substantial was cracking. It wasn't just what they said. It was realizing how perfectly rehearsed their dismissal was, how effortlessly they waited for a chance to redirect the spotlight. They acted as if they'd been waiting for this exact moment to diminish me and elevate their golden child Hayden, who currently hadn't achieved anything of note beyond accumulating tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt that I was discreetly servicing. They consistently ignored the fact that Hayden's attempts at meaningful work were currently being funded entirely by my clever numbers. The night wore on, a slow, agonizing crawl through forced politeness and subtle insults. Every time I managed to introduce a topic related to my future or my success, my mother, Lydia Vance, would steer the conversation sharply back to Hayden's career, or rather, his impending failures, and the high-profile relationship that was supposedly his safety net. My father, Jeffrey, kept repeating the phrase, legacy and public trust, as if my work in predictive analytics was beneath the notice of the Vance lineage. My manager Seth stood to offer a genuine, thoughtful toast, the kind of sincere praise I never expected to hear spoken aloud about me. My chest tightened as he raised his glass and said, "Elara is one of the most capable young consultants I've ever worked with. She's destined to be a director before she's 30. The applause washed over me and I turned toward my parents, just needing a glance, a flicker of pride, a single sign that they heard the affirmation. Instead, my father leaned back and murmured to my mother loud enough for the table to catch, "Compared to a man in public office, it doesn't measure up." That final statement was the floorboard finally giving way after 2 decades of relentless strain. My resolve dissolved, and then, in one effortless, casual breath, my mother delivered the sentence that would split my world wide open. "You know, sometimes I wonder why Elara takes things so seriously," she commented, sipping her water. "Hayden never causes this kind of career drama." The word drama twisted the knife. I felt the entire room tilt on its axis. I knew I was seconds away from hearing the exact words that would unravel everything I thought bound us. When the words finally came, they weren't shouted in anger. They were delivered softly, almost casually, the way someone might comment on the temperature of the room. "I wish you were never born," my mother said, looking directly at me with that same brittle, cold sweetness. For a single heartbeat, I didn't register the meaning. The room felt too bright, too quiet, too still. Then the meaning sank in sharp and cold like a fresh incision. My mother wasn't just frustrated or tired or being dramatic. She meant it. She said it with the same ease she used when ordering her favorite Cabernet. A fork clattered somewhere near the end of the long table. Someone gasped sharply. My throat tightened, but nothing came out. I felt every pair of eyes on me waiting to see what the sensible one, the quiet one, the one who always swallowed her feelings would do next. Instead of crying, I simply pushed my chair back, stood tall, and said what needed to be said before walking away from the table, leaving the shattered pieces of my relationship right there on the crisp linen tablecloth. I drove the long route back to my apartment in Boston, the cold night air wrapping around me like a curtain. Rain had begun to fall, a fine mist that blurred the city lights into streaks of gold and blue. I didn't cry. I thought I would collapse into tears the second I was alone, but nothing came. Instead, there was only a numb, echoing exhaustion, one that had been building for years. Every forgotten birthday, every polite, patronizing comment, every financial obligation I had carried without question, all of it suddenly felt unbearably heavy. By the time I reached my apartment, my silk blazer was damp and my hands were shaking faintly. I kicked off my expensive heels, sank onto the hardwood floor in the dark living room, and stared at the blinking router light like it might offer me a direction. My phone buzzed persistently. 11 missed calls from my mother and father. Then a single text message popped up on the screen. Not from my mother, but from my father, Jeffrey Vance. "You embarrassed us. I hope you are proud of yourself for ruining the night." Proud. The word twisted sourly in my chest. Pride was something they never felt for me but expected me to feel for them, their legacy, and their golden son. Something inside me gave way, not with a sudden snap, but with a quiet, steady shift toward resolution. I opened my banking application. 3 automatic recurring transfers waited in the queue, scheduled for the first of the month. One was the $2,500 for the family property tax installment in Dallas. The second was the $1,800 for my mother's exclusive country club membership fees. The most significant one was the $50,000 payment that was meant to cover the balance of Hayden's escalating irresponsible credit card debt. For a second, my finger hovered above the screen. The old version of me, the one who lived on obligation and toxic loyalty, fought to breathe and make excuses. Then I hit cancel. 1, 2, 3. Each confirmation clicked like a lock turning in a door I was finally sealing shut. The silence in my dark apartment changed instantly. It wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, clean, and entirely mine. This was not about petty revenge. This was about self-preservation, about reclaiming the resources I had been forced to use to prop up their unsustainable facade. I canceled the transfers knowing this action alone would trigger an immediate financial crisis back in Dallas. The $50,000 debt was only the tip of the iceberg. Hayden had a much larger secret financial hole that I had been discreetly funneling money into for months. I knew the consequences of my cancellations would be swift and severe, and for the first time in my life I felt no guilt, only a quiet, resolute strength. I had always understood that my family valued money and reputation more than they valued me, but their subsequent silence was chilling. 3 weeks passed without a single word from my parents. Not an apology, not an explanation for the cruelty they inflicted, just the silence they had always demanded from me, now pointed back at them sharp enough to cut. Strangely, I didn't miss them, not the way a daughter is supposed to miss her family. I missed only the idea of them, the fabricated version I kept trying to invent just so I wouldn't feel completely alone in the world. Letting go of that decades-long illusion was painful, but also brutally honest and clean. Work instantly became my refuge. The massive corporate restructuring project I had been assigned swallowed entire days whole, demanding 12 to 15 hours of my focus, but I didn't mind the overwhelming schedule. For the first time, I wasn't pouring my finite energy out just to be intentionally overlooked. People listened intently when I spoke in meetings. Clients deferred instantly to my data-driven judgment. My manager, Seth Miller, handed me responsibility like he absolutely trusted me to carry it, because he genuinely did. I immersed myself completely in the numbers, using my financial expertise to analyze the Vance family's public records, a habit I developed out of necessity. It was then that I confirmed the true depth of the financial hole my brother Hayden was sitting in. Beyond the credit card debt, there was a $150,000 personal loan taken out against the family home to fund his spectacularly failed secret run for a minor political office. This discovery confirmed that the real legacy work my parents so proudly touted was essentially a massive money pit that I was forced to maintain. Crucially, I discovered that Hayden's entire relationship with Tam Fawn Hugh, an influential and wealthy figure in Texas, was primarily a strategic financial and social alliance. Tam Fawn Hugh valued image and clean finance above all else, making Hayden's impending financial collapse a direct threat to his own reputation. My financial cutoff had not just stopped a few bills. It had directly pulled the rug out from under Hayden's carefully constructed political life support. One night, my colleague Seth Miller showed up with takeout containers and a bottle of expensive single-malt whiskey, which he pretended to not care about but clearly did. "Just checking if you're still alive," he joked gently, stepping over the pile of books near my door. I sat on the floor again, this time with him beside me. Steam from the food rose gently, pulling me back into the present moment. "I think," I said slowly, looking at the whiskey glass, "I'm done saving them." Seth didn't interrupt or tell me to reconsider. He just nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "It was about time you saved yourself, Elara. They don't deserve your kindness." Something settled inside me, then a solid anchor. For the first time in my life, I wasn't drowning in obligation. I was finally surfacing. My hard-won peace was violently shattered late one Tuesday evening when I returned from a lengthy business trip. Standing on the landing outside my apartment door, their silhouettes were clear through the frosted glass. For a second I thought it might be a delivery, but then I heard my mother's voice, tight with forced authority. "Elara, open the door. We know you are in there." My stomach dropped, but I didn't move immediately. I no longer owed them urgency or compliance. When I finally unlocked the door, my mother Lydia and my father Jeffrey swept inside without waiting for a formal invitation, acting as if my Boston apartment was just another asset I maintained for their convenience. My father took a stance near the window, hands clasped stiffly behind his back. My mother Lydia paced once, then faced me with brittle, contained anger. "We need to talk," she demanded, cutting straight to the point. "About Hayden?" Of course it was about Hayden. It had always been about him. My mother's voice sharpened with a rare, desperate urgency. His credit lines are frozen, the property tax payment was missed, and his $150,000 loan balance is now overdue, putting the Dallas house in default status. She stopped, her eyes flashing accusation. If we don't cover the balance immediately, the bank will seize the collateral, and Jeffrey's political donors will find out. You know what that means for Hayden and Tam Fawn Hugh. I didn't sit down. I didn't blink. And I asked, letting the question hang in the cold air. My mother snapped, the practiced control finally cracking. And we need your help, Elara, now. Don't be petty. Hayden is your brother. Family is family. The sheer audacity of the demand landed like a heavy physical blow. They hadn't come to apologize for the restaurant, or to ask how I was, or to acknowledge the fracture they had created. They came because they needed me to fix their favorite child's life again, to clean up the catastrophic mess I was explicitly told didn't measure up to meaningful work. I laughed, a short, bitter, unaffectedly cold sound. I paid his debt for years. I covered your bills, the mortgage, the insurance. I worked myself raw so this family didn't fall apart, I stated, stepping closer. And you stood in that restaurant and told me you wished I had never been born. My father straightened, his face hardening instantly. We were angry. You made a scene? No. I countered, my voice low but carrying absolute conviction. You made the scene. I just walked out of it. You're our daughter, Elara. My mother pleaded, her tone rising into a dangerous shriek. You owe us. I cut her off, my composure ironclad. I owe nothing. You don't get to play the family card now. My father's face was red, contorted in genuine rage and disbelief. We raised you, he shouted. I shook my head slowly, meeting his furious gaze. You didn't raise me, I said, the words hitting him harder than I expected. You drained me. I walked toward the front door, opening it wide, letting the cold hallway light spill into my living room. If you came here to apologize, I said quietly, I would listen. But if you came to ask for money, or more of my time? I paused, looking each of them directly in the eyes, completely steady and unshaken. That conversation ended the night you disowned me. My mother scoffed, her arms tightly crossed, grasping for some angle, some leverage she no longer possessed. You are making a huge mistake, Elara. You'll regret this. Someday you'll realize you need your family more than you need this money. That was the final shift, the moment everything in me finally aligned into a clarity so sharp it felt like breathing pure oxygen for the first time. I stood taller than I'd ever felt in my life and spoke the words I never imagined I'd have the strength to utter. I already told you how to live your lives. I nodded toward the open doorway. Consider me as if I never existed. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Elara. They went perfectly still. My father's lips parted, speechless. My mother's face blanched to a sickly white. The entire room, the tension, the air, the space between us froze like someone had pressed pause on their lives. They had nothing left to take, nothing left to control. My mother turned sharply, walking out first in a huff of defeated anger. My father followed her much slower, like a man walking away from a raging house fire he didn't expect to spread. When the apartment door finally clicked shut behind them, the profound quiet that immediately filled my space wasn't empty or lonely. It was entirely wonderfully mine. In the days that followed, I waited for the familiar ache of guilt to return, the second-guessing, the instinct to rush back and fix what wasn't mine to fix. But it never came. Instead, there was a strange, liberating stillness inside me, a quiet strength I'd spent my whole life chasing without knowing its name. The consequences of my action were exactly as I predicted. With the $150,000 loan in default and the property taxes missed, the bank launched an internal investigation. Jeffrey Vance's reputation was immediately damaged among his conservative political network. The financial instability was the exact kind of high-profile drama that Tam Fan Hugh could not tolerate. Within 2 weeks, Hayden's strategic financially crucial alliance with the judge was publicly dissolved, and his career aspirations in DC collapsed entirely. My work surged forward. Our corporate restructuring project closed with results far beyond the forecast. My manager, Seth Miller, pulled me aside with a smile of genuine pride. "You're ready, Elara," he said, handing me the final director-level contract I had silently fought for over the last year. This time, I didn't question whether I deserved the immense success. The finality of my decision was the catalyst for my freedom. Maybe I was never the daughter they wanted, the one who would quietly prop up their crumbling empire. But I became the woman I needed to be self-sufficient, fiercely intelligent, and finally, undeniably, whole. If you've ever carried the crushing weight of a family that couldn't see your worth or actively worked to keep you small, you know this truth. Cutting ties is not abandonment, it is self-preservation. Your loyalty is meant for the person who respects you most, yourself. Never be afraid to be the one who walks away and builds your own legacy.